In this lesson, we're going to take a look at page 20 and page 21 in the Alfred All-in-One Piano Book, Level 1. So this introduces some really interesting and useful information for learning how to play the piano and learning how to read music. So this talks about the grand staff. It also gives you an example of a piece of music that's, I guess, correspondingly called Playing on the Grand Staff. A little bit on the nose, I think, but, you know, we'll deal with it. So review the lessons prior to this one to make sure that you remember notation, that you understand what a beat is, that you remember what the grand staff is, and of course the clefs, the treble, and the bass, and this bracket or brace, as it's called here, that joins the two staves together so that they're understood as a single unit for the right hand reading the treble clef and the left hand, here's where there's notation for the left hand, reading the bass. A couple of things before we get started at the keyboard. In another lesson, I mentioned specifically that sometimes you have written out repeats and other times you have a symbol that tells you to repeat a given section of music. Here are those symbols, those double dots, right there, you can see them, that occur to the left of the final double bar line. These, as you can see right here, it says the double dots mean repeat from the beginning. So you're going to read this piece of music as follows, from left to right and from top down. So it's going to go this way, then you're going to continue to the second line here. You hit the end, you've got those double dots at the double bar, and then you go right back to the beginning and play it again without break. So in other words, if you're counting here at the end, you're going to count 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see, I didn't take any breaks. I didn't do 1, 2, 3, 4. Get a cup of coffee or something, wait, and then at your leisure, come back. It's not like that. You keep going straight through and then all the way to the end, and then you stop. Okay, so let's review other new things on this page. The new thing on this page is something called a time signature. So a time signature is always placed at the beginning of a piece of music. There it is. This is not a fraction. So this isn't a whole, as in 4 over 4. What this is 4 over 4 with every number representing something different. So the top number versus the bottom number, the top versus the bottom, they have different designations, different meanings. The top number tells you how many beats there are in one complete cycle. Right? Now remember from a previous lesson that a cycle in this case is visually indicated by a measure and a bar line or a measure line, right there, that vertical line. So this space contains within it consistently, as indicated in this piece and as indicated by the top number of the time signature, that there are going to be 4 beats. The bottom number tells you the value of the beat. So in this case, the number 4 on the bottom of the time signature indicates a quarter note. So 4 here represents a quarter. So there are 4, top number, quarters, bottom number, in every cycle of beats. And that cycle is visually demonstrated with a single measure, and then a bar line to indicate when one measure is done, when one cycle of beats is complete, and the next one begins. The next one is complete here, and it begins in the third measure, ends here, and so on. So how many measures are there here in this first line? 1, 2, 3, and 4. What about how many measures in the second line? 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, we can refer to them as measure 1 in the first line, measure, for example, 2 in the second line, or we can simply start numbering them from the beginning through to the end, which means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll use either one, right? For example, I might say, take a look at measure number 4 in line number 2. So it's here and then measure 4. Or I might say, take a look at measure number 8, right there. It doesn't really matter. I'll use either one, whichever kind of comes up, but just be ready that both of them refer to the same location, correct? Now, the next thing I want to introduce is just to be clear, it's not exactly accurate to call this a line. I was doing so earlier, but I'd like to start using a different term that I'll use going forward consistently, and that term is system, S-Y-S-T-E-M. This is a system. A system, just to keep it really simple, is basically when you have a brace or a bracket that combines several, well, 2 and more staves. So once these staves are put together, now we have a system of staves, and this system extends from the left side of the page until the page runs out on the right side. So there are 2 systems in this piece. The only reason that we have at any point more than one system is because the page runs out on the right. For example, if we had some sort of infinite scroll where the page wouldn't end here, but these total of 8 measures just kept going this way, then we would have a single system until the double bar line at the end of the piece. But because we're dealing with physical space, the page runs out, we have a system break right there, and we continue with measures 5, 6, 7, and 8 in the second system. That's all. So there are 2 systems for playing on the grand staff. Similarly, if you turn the page and take a look at Rock Along and the Mexican Hat Dance, there are also 2 systems, right? System number 1, system break, system number 2. Same thing here, system number 1, break, system number 2. That's it. And of course you notice the double bar line and the dots at the end here as well, which means that when you get here, you come back and you repeat. When you get here, you come back and you repeat from the beginning. Okay, so let's be clear about some things before we begin to play. In system number 1, because all of the notation is here for the treble clef, it's the right hand playing. For system number 2, because all of the notation is here for the bass clef, it's the left hand playing. So what we need to be able to do is make sure that we understand the rhythms, we understand the fingering, we understand the letters so that we can read the notation clearly, and then be able to play it. So before we actually start naming those letters, let's just make sure we have one new piece of information, which is, what is the left hand doing as the right hand plays? Well, as you can see, there are no note heads here, so the left hand is simply silent. And silence in music is called a rest. So rests are rhythms just like quarter notes or half notes or whole notes are, using these note heads and the corresponding stems. But rests don't look like these, as you can see. So for example, here is something called a whole rest, which really just looks like a black bar. And that black bar sits right below line number 4. Right? Remember, we count the lines from the bottom up on the staff. So 1, 2, 3, 4. There's that whole rest. And for every measure that's completely silent in the left hand, you have a whole rest indicated, which again just means don't play. Notice that the same thing happens here for the second system, that the left hand, because the bass clef is utilized, the left hand plays, and while it plays, the right hand does nothing. So the right hand just has that little black bar sitting below line number 4, which again indicates a whole rest, or a rest that's equivalent to a whole note durationally, so the equivalent of 4 beats. And in this case, we know that every beat is the quarter note. How do we know that again? Because of the bottom number of the time signature, where this number 4 represents a quarter note, or stands for or signifies the quarter note. All right, so now that we're in a position to be able to play this, let's make sure that we understand what the letters are. Obviously, the authors of this book are very nice to fill in all of the letters, but ultimately they'll stop doing that, which is actually better for us, because you don't want this passive reading of the information already given. You want to be able to actively identify these letters. So let's do a very quick thing. We're going to read through this exercise with a beat. Now remember, the beat here is the quarter, and we're going to speak the letters from here to there, just for the right hand, and with with careful attention paid to the different rhythms. All of these are quarters filled in note heads with a stem, and this is a half note, which again is an open note head with a stem. So let's go through this. 1, 2, I'm going to speak the letters. Ready? And C, D, E, F, G, 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 F, E, D, C, 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 break. Okay? Remember, the half note is equivalent to 2 quarters. That's why when I got to this G half note or this C half note, I held it for 2 beats, as in G, and the same thing for C. Okay? So let's try playing that. All right, so I'm in my, for the right hand, I'm in my C4 position, middle C position, and finger number 1 corresponds to C, finger number 2 for D, finger number 3 for E, finger number 4 for F, and finger number 5 for G. And that's the entire exercise, right? Just those 5 letters. So let's play it. Here we go. 1, 2, ready, and. Okay, pretty straightforward. And that's the top of this system for the right hand. Let's take a look at the second system with the left hand. What you notice is if you look really carefully and you kind of measure one of each system, this measure to this measure, this measure to this measure, what you'll see is that it's exactly the same letters, but they're not unisons, right? Because these are the same letters, but not in the same octaves, right? So this first system, this is all in the 4th octave. For this second system, this is all in the 3rd octave because this is the 5-finger position for the left hand starting on C3. So 5th finger is on C3, 4th finger on D, 3rd finger on E, 2nd finger on F, and 1st finger on G. And this is the 3rd octave, whereas the right hand is in the 4th octave, okay? So this is what we're going to do. We're going to now switch over to the second system and just be able to play the left hand. Now, the letters, as you can see, are the same, as we've indicated, but the fingers are not. So the fingering here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 5, and then back down by step, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1, 1. Over here, it is the reverse. Why is it the reverse? Well, just to point out something that I think is obvious, but just to really call it out, our hands have mirror symmetry. It's almost as though you draw this imaginary line between the hands, and this hand's image reflects onto that one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if my right hand plays 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, to do the same thing with the left hand requires playing the reverse. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So let's do that. Second system, left hand plays 1, 2, ready, and. So that's what the left hand sounds like. The rhythms are identical. You can see 4 quarters, 2 quarters and a half, 4 quarters, 2 quarters and a half note, the same exact thing for the left hand. The challenge here is to play the right hand and then switch directly to the left hand without any kind of break. Remember that this break, this system break, is visual only. The beats keep going. So when they keep going from here to there. When you start a piece, it's kind of like beginning a stopwatch, right? Or a countdown of some sort. Once you begin, the beats go on very evenly, just like I'm demonstrating now, until you get to the end. Here, this is not really the end because you're going to repeat back to the beginning and then play through. So as you can see, unlike, for example, on page 17, this is not, page 20, this is not orally, right? Orally has these 4 measures written over twice. What I said during that lesson, this is a written out repeat. Here, the repeat is not written out. All that music is not renotated. We just have an indication to go back to the beginning. So, this is how we're going to play it. Both hands on the keyboard in the corresponding 5-finger positions for either C4 or middle C or C3 for the left hand. And both hands are going to stay on the keyboard because you don't want something like this happening. As you approach the end of System 1, oops, I forgot my left hand. Right, you don't want to have that kind of janky surprise where one hand forgot to get into position and you either forget the position or you just don't get there in time. So both hands begin before you even start playing, and this piece is going to sound like this. 1, 2, ready, and. So obviously you heard that I incorporated the repeat, and that's what this first official piece of music for both hands sounds like, playing on the grand staff. So let's keep this momentum going and take a look at page 21 for these 2 pieces, Rock Along and the Mexican Hat Dance. Now, Rock Along, very, very similar to playing on the grand staff, as in, we've got 2 systems, 1, 2. Each system has 4 measures, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Each system focuses on one hand. The top system focuses on the right hand, the bottom system on the left hand. So let's go through and make sure that we see what the letters are, the fingering, and then let's try playing it. Just like those exercises on pages 14 and 15 for the right hand and 18 and 19 for the left hand, this is a series of skips, and here at the end, unisons. Of course, from G down to C, that's a leap, specifically a leap of 5. Here's G, here's C, and we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So remember that any interval size larger than 3, larger than a skip, is considered a leap. So, C, C, E, G, E, G, C, C, C. Again, very easy because those letters are already given. Something a little bit more challenging. What are the rhythms? Half note, 2 quarters. Half note, 2 quarters. Half note, whole note. You remember that a whole note is equivalent to 2 half notes. It's equivalent to 4 quarters, right? 4 counts, or 2 counts if you're basing this relative to the half note. Either way, this whole note is twice as long as 1 half note, or 4 times as long as 1 quarter. We have a time signature just like here of 4/4, which means that we have top number 4, bottom number quarters, 4 quarters in every measure. So let's try playing it. Let's start with system number 1. And so I'm going to give you that beat. And remember that the quarter receives 1 beat, the half note receives 2 beats, and and the whole note receives 4 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, so let's try playing this with all the correct values. So 1, 2, rhythmic values, that is, not moral values. I don't know about that. So 1, 2, ready, and. 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, that's what the right hand sounds like. Now the left hand, as you can see, if you compare measure to measure, just vertically down, measure 1, 2, measure 1 in the second system, it's exactly the same, right? The letters are C, C, E, G, C, 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 exactly like this, but they're not unisons. Just to reiterate what I spoke about with playing on the grand staff, these are actually in different octaves. This is the 4th octave, this is the 3rd octave, right? So same letters, different octave, and because it's a different hand, left hand playing, the fingering will be different because remember, we've got mirror symmetry. So if the right hand goes 1, 1, 3, 5, then the left hand goes 5, 5, 3, 1. Right, you can see that to move up in this hand and to move up in this hand requires different fingers. 1, 3, 5 compared to 5, 3, 1. But you get that because I've been repeating that point quite a bit. So let's just take a look at the fingers. 5, 5, 3, 1, 3, 1, 5, 5, 5. Okay? In fact, let's speak them in time. 1, 2, ready, and. 5, 5, 3, 1, 3, 1, 5, 5. Now 4 beats, 5, 2, 3, 4, release. Okay, good. So you understand what's happening in the left hand. Let's play it. Okay, left hand. 1, 2, ready, and. Okay, so we've played through each system separately. The next thing, of course, is to play them one after the other with no break, just like we did with playing on the grand staff. And of course, incorporating these repeat signs. So the repeat sign means that once you're done here, without any delay, you continue right back to the beginning and you play straight through to the end. So let's do it. Here we go. Both hands on the keyboard in the correct C positions. C4, C3, and here we go. Now, I'm going to use, I think what I'll do is, in the previous run with this piece, playing on the grand staff on the previous page, I was just sort of counting whenever I got to half notes. So I'm going to count over this, okay? I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure that you remember that I'm counting the beats. I'm not speaking the fingers, okay? Remember I said in another lesson that different sets of numbers mean different things. So if I say 1, 3, 5, that's fingering. If I count 1, 2, 3, 4, that's counting the beats. Here we go. So I'll be playing and counting the beats, and since it indicates a repeat, I'll go back to the beginning of this piece. 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, repeat, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, that was rock along. And you don't necessarily have to count like this, but you can also turn on a metronome or a click track, or have someone next to you snap or clap. You get the point. Let's move on to the last piece of this lesson, which is the Mexican hat dance, which introduces just a couple of extra features which we'll learn about. So the first new thing that this introduces is a new type of rest. Remember, a notation for a silence in music, which is an example of a rhythm because it has duration, right? So just to review what we already know, this black bar that hangs below the fourth line is a whole rest, or the equivalent using this time signature of 4 beats, which is the same thing as 4 quarter notes, or 2 half notes, or 1 whole note, you get it. This interesting squiggly symbol is called a quarter rest, which means that it takes the exact same amount of time as 1 articulated quarter note. So if you're looking at this individual measure, half note, quarter rest. So you would count 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is your rest. So you could say 1, 2, 3, rest. And then the same thing in this measure, same thing in this measure with the quarter rest. And then for the second system, you can see it switches over to the treble clef. Same thing, rest and rest right there. And then the end is a bit different. We'll talk about that in a moment. But now that we're familiar with the quarter rest and what the rhythmic implications of that quarter rest are, let's see if we can learn this piece visually, at least for the first system, before we continue. So observe an interesting thing. We've got 4 measures in system number 1. We have a time signature of 4/4. So 4 beats, and the value of each beat is a quarter. So 4 quarters in a single metric cycle, or a single cycle of beats. That's what meter means. Meter is just a cycle of beats. But review the lessons about rhythm and meter to really have a fuller understanding of that. But for now, I want you to observe some things visually. Look at this measure and look at this measure. They are the same, which means that once you learn this measure, you've learned that measure. So no need to keep relearning things, right? We want to be efficient. Skip measure number 3 and go to measure number 4. This measure rhythmically is identical to the first 2, right? Half note, quarter, quarter rest. Half note, quarter, quarter rest. The difference, however, is that the letters, the pitches, the keys are different. This starts on G3 down to E3. Same thing for measure number 2. What about measure number 4? This starts on E3 and skips down to C3. So even though the rhythms are the same, the pitches are not. However, the interval is the same in terms of size. G down to E is a skip down. E down to C is also a skip down. So hopefully you can observe that comparing these 2 measures, measures 1 and 2, to measure 4 is really a comparison where the rhythms and the intervallic content, right, the skip down, maintain, they're identical, right, in terms of size, but the letters themselves are not. So there's a name for this relationship where the pattern and the shape, right, we fall by a skip both ways, descending skip in these measures and this measure, where those things maintain, but the pattern shifts from one letter to start on another letter. This is called transposition. So this pattern is shifted over to begin on a new letter in this measure, and so the relationship between these measures, measures 1 and 2, and measure 4, is one of transposition, a shifting pattern, okay? So let's see how that manifests. Measures 1 and 2 have the same letters and fingers. That is finger number 1 on G, finger number 3 on E. Okay, so let's just play measure 1 with the correct count. Remember, we have a half note, a quarter, and a quarter rest. All right, so 1, 2, ready, and. That's measure 1. And now compare that to measure 4, which is E down to C, and the same exact rhythms, right? So this is measure number 4, 3rd finger on E, down to 5th finger on C. So ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do, and I'd like you to do the same thing with me. I'm going to play measures 1 and 2, and then I'm going to skip measure 3 and play measure 4. Okay, but now when I skip measure 3, what I mean by this is it's not that I'm not going to count it. I'm actually literally going to still keep counting, but I just won't play anything. So I'm going to play the entire first system, but there'll just be silence here. And the reason I want you to do that is just to practice still having something there, like a placeholder before we learn this measure. The placeholder will just be the beats continuing. But I want you more specifically to be able to hear the transposition, right, of this pattern starting on G, transposed to the same pattern, down a skip, same rhythms, starting on E. So here we go. 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, rest. 1, 2, 3, rest. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, rest. Okay, so you can hear that sequence. And then, okay, now I just used a new term, but sequence is basically a transposition that occurs within the same octave, or in this case, the same register. So more generally, a sequence is a series of transpositions, and we do have one transposition here, so that is a sequence. But if that word troubles you at this point, you heard the transposition. Let's fill in measure number 3. So here, obviously the fingering and the letters are given, and it's pretty straightforward. So we start on D3, finger 4, up a step to E, up a step to F, and then down a skip to D. So let's play just that measure in time. 1, 2, ready, and. And now we have to start putting this together because we have these two and then these two measures separately. But that's not a performance. That's just like the little building blocks that ultimately we have to put together, glue them together to at least be able to play system number 1. So let's begin by playing these two measures together, okay, one after the other. Measure 3 to measure 4. Here we go. Starting on 4 on D. 1, 2, ready, and. Rest. Okay, let's play measures 1 and 2 together. Ready, and. Rest. Rest. You're going to use that rest as a way to give yourself time to prepare for the next note in measure 3, which starts on D or finger number 4, and then you're going to play ahead, okay? So here's measures 3 and 4 again. Ready, and. And now we have to combine measures 1 and 2 without any breaks, going directly into 3 and 4. So here's what all that sounds like together. 1, 2, ready, and. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and so that is system number 1. Now let's take a look at system number 2. First of all, you notice that system number 2, the first two measures, are identical in terms of the letters and the rhythms to the first two measures of system number 1. What's not the same is that this is played in the treble clef, this uses different fingerings, and of course it's in a different octave. This is the third octave, this is the fourth octave. But we already have in our ears what this sounds like. Here are the first two measures for the second system. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, rest. 1, 2, 3, rest. So you can very clearly hear that it's the same pattern here, but just up an octave. Half note, quarter, quarter rest, fingers 5 and 3. Look at these two measures. Again, they're the same, but in a different octave. 4, 3, 2, 4 is the left hand. The corresponding fingers for the same letters up an octave for the right hand are 2, 3, 4, 2. That's, remember, we're in C position. 2, 3, 4, 2. And they're all quarters, so of course they're all even relative to one another. So it sounds like this. Ready, and. And finally, the very last note, this measure and this measure, of course, look completely different. Remember, this is a transposition of measures 1 and 2. This is definitely not, because we lose that pattern. We don't have two notes anymore. We don't even have any intervals present because we just have a single note. So this is a whole note, right, which had the equivalent of 4 quarters or 4 beats, given this time signature on C4 or middle C or finger number 1. So that's just this. So let's play the last two measures in time. Actually, I'll keep this here so you can see it. So from here to the end. 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4, release. So let's play system number 2 without any breaks from here to there with the right hand. And I will count the beats as I play. 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Release. Okay, so we have just a couple more things to do and we're done with this lesson. We need to be able to play the left hand, transitioning directly to the right hand without any break. And then, of course, because we've got these double dots indicating the repeat, we have to go back to the beginning and play it straight through again. So to be able to do this, put both hands in the correct C positions, just like we've done with the previous two pieces, Rock Along and Playing on the Grand Staff on page 20. And let's just count through. So I'm going to play this piece as it sounds with the repeat. All the while, I will be counting the beats in cycles of 4. 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, ready, and. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Release. Let me play that one more time. This time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play without speaking over it. So no more counting, right? You can count for yourselves if you want, or you can just listen for the musicality of this piece where there's no externalized beat count, but it's just the piece as it would sound in a performance, right? Because performers don't typically count over their music. Okay, so here we go. 1, 2, ready, and. So that was a long lesson, but that covers pages 20 and 21. So if you need to practice these, my recommendation is to practice them separately and then try playing them all as a group. So in fact, before the lesson is complete, just so I put my money where my mouth is, let me do that for you. So I'm not going to count anymore. And I'm also not going to take the repeats just for the sake of time, because you've already heard all of this played very diligently with all the repeats in place. So I'm going to play Playing on the Grand Staff on page 20. I'll take a pause. I'll play Rock Along at the top of 21, and then the Mexican Hat Dance, all without repeats. So remember, no repeats. And here we go. This is so that when you practice, you get a sense of more than just one piece, because performers tend to play sets of pieces, and it's important psychologically to learn how to play more rather than less, right? Several pieces in a row, and to have that concentration to not make any mistakes as you move from one piece to the next. So here we go, Playing on the Grand Staff. I'm not going to count over it, I'll just give you the preparatory beats, and everything will be slightly faster. And no repeats. 1, 2, ready, and. Here's Rock Along. 1, 2, ready, and. And finally, the Mexican Hat Dance. 1, 2, ready, and. Okay, good luck practicing.